Welcome to Checks and Balances. I'm Michael Vincent. This is James Blair, and we're joined by Ben Brinkerhoff from Consilium. And this week, the science of regret.
So Ben, the head of advice at Consilium, just as a quick reminder, Ben works with about 150 financial advice firms around the country, helping manage about $7 billion of money. There's not much the man doesn't know when it comes to planning for retirement, what different widget you should be invested in for your financial future. Yeah. Ben, great to have you back again today.
Good. It's nice to be here. Thank you.
So today we're talking about regret. And one thing I'd like to say beforehand, Mike, is if we can be careful about this, okay? We don't want to spook anybody with your regrets. So, Mike, I know you've got a few questions to ask on the regret side. Where should we start today?
Well, definitely not with mine. So, look, I guess I know that you've done some research into this and I guess the science of regret and what that sort of means. How did you get into this, or how did you get interested in this topic, especially from a financial advice perspective?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we were going through COVID, and I was writing a lot of articles that I hoped advisors would be able to use to kind of keep clients calm and in their seats. And I was thinking to myself, if they sold their portfolio and the markets rebounded really quickly, they'd regret that. And I was thinking there must be something about regret that I could learn about. And when we're constructing portfolios, we're often looking at what is the academic literature about how to invest. We want to look at people that don't seem to have a direct financial incentive in proving one outcome or another outcome and have their research peer-reviewed. It just seems to be a good place to go and find facts. I thought there must be some academic research about regret. And I recalled when I was doing this, and I was looking for this research, I recalled when I was a teenager, and in high school, there was a program at my high school in the United States called peer counseling. The idea of a peer counseling was if you had a student that was really depressed and sad, that they might have trouble speaking to an adult, but maybe they'd be willing to speak to someone their own age.
Yeah.
And so every day we'd walk into peer counseling, and one of the things we had to do in our training is they'd have something on the whiteboard, and we'd have to copy down our journal and respond to it. And there was this poem written by a woman who was 85 in Louisville, Kentucky. Her name was Nadine Stair. If you want to look up this poem, I'm sure you can find it. And the poem was entitled "If I Had My Life to Live Over." You know, and she talks about living life incredibly cautiously, and how she would just always, everywhere she went, she would be just absolutely prepared, like a Boy Scout.
Yeah. And
how she'd always traveled very heavily. And if she had to live life over again, she would be a lot more free and less worried and less encumbered, and she'd stay out later at night, and she'd pick more daisies, and she'd go barefoot more often, etc. And I must have written down in my journal dozens and dozens and dozens, but that one stuck with me.
Yeah.
And thinking about regret. And so as I was looking into the science of regret, I came across this research. It was written in the journal Emotion. And the two authors were Shai Davidson and Thomas Gilovich. Now, Thomas Gilovich is someone I was familiar with because he has also written extensively on the science of happiness, which is a topic that I am really interested in. And so what Davidson and Gilovich did is they tried to understand the different types of regret. And so what they did is they took a bunch of respondents in their study, and they had them write out all the things they could think of that they regretted, right? Without maybe revealing their anonymity. All the things they could think of and you can think about things that you might regret and that you just wish you had a mulligan you could do over. And then they described these two different things. And one is the regret from things you should have done and that you didn't do.
Yeah.
And the other is the type of regret from things you could have done. So should and could, right? And they labeled them ought and ideal because should and could are two similar words, right?
Yeah.
But ought is I ought to have been a better person, you know? I ought to have lived up to the responsibilities that I had and I've shirked somehow. And ideal is I didn't live up to the type of person I really feel like I am.
Yeah.
Or that I aspire to be. So often, ideal regret is the regret you have from having never tried something that your fears got in the way or life got in the way, and I didn't do it when I felt like I, could have. Where should have is I've really done something awful to someone, and I feel bad about having done that. Right. So these two different types of regret. And the question is posed, well, which kind of regret do you think is more common? And most people think when I initially say to you, what do you regret? People think, oh, my little brother, I hazed him, or an ex-girlfriend that I wasn't faithful to, or they think about something they've done. They're like, oh, I still feel cringy when I think about that, and it makes me, feel bad. And we think it's going to be the I should have kind of regret. I should have been nicer and I wasn't nicer. And that's not actually the majority of regret. The majority of regrets that people have is not actually having lived up to the ideals that they had for themselves. It's the things they didn't do that they regret, not the things they did but they felt bad about.
Yeah.
And I looking at that going, oh, that's kind of profound. That's profound in a different sense, because I was thinking about the regret like I sell my portfolio and then I go, oh, the market went up. I'm like, oh, I lost all this money and I buy back in. That is the kind I should have held on. I didn't. It's a should have regret. Right? But that's not where regrets end up sitting.
Yeah.
Majority. And I thought, gee, okay. And why is that? And there's a couple different suggestions about why it is that these ideal regrets are regrets we have more so. One is, well, if I treated you badly, James, I could make an amends about that. So if I did do something bad, and I go, I treated James awfully, I can always go back and make an amends for that. So like I can have a sense of restoration. Yeah. Another thing is there's a silver lining. I could have treated you badly, and the next time I have an opportunity in a very similar situation, I think, I remember how I treated James, and I'm going to be different this time. So the silver lining is, while my relationship with James is impaired and may never be restored, but I'm going to learn the lesson and apply that forward. So there's a silver lining in sometimes these regrets. Another is when I don't do something that I feel like would be more consistent with who I am as a person, when I leave that regret on the table and I don't ever take action, well, it feels very unjustifiable in retrospect. So let me give you an example. Again, I'm studying for a test, and I think to myself, I should really study that type of differential equation, whatever it is, right? Because that's likely to be on my calculus test, but maybe not, and then it's on there. Well, now after the test, you go, oh, I knew it was going to be on the test, and I didn't study it.
Yeah.
Well, you didn't know. In prospect, there was uncertainty. In retrospect, there's no uncertainty. So you look back on your life and you think all the things you were afraid of they're all boogeymen.
Yeah.
And you're like, I didn't do it.
Yeah.
And all those things were just boogeymen. They didn't appear that way at the time, but in retrospect, you realize I was boxing at shadows. Right? And the last thing is that we have something in our brain that when we accomplish something, our brain relaxes. It's like when we anticipate something, we get a bit of a dopamine hit, and then until we actually achieve it, we feel agitated.
Yeah.
And when we achieve it, we go, and we relax a little bit. No, sometimes we don't even enjoy it. Sometimes the relaxing is just the agitation going away. Well, when you never do something, you never resolve the itch in your brain. And so you remember more the things you didn't do, even than the things you did do. So these four kind of reasons are offered up. And then this is actually quite profound, and I found a book written by a palliative nurse. Right? You can see what kind of insight a palliative nurse might have. And her name was Bronnie Ware, and it was called The 5 Regrets of the Dying. Again, we're not meant to give plugs, but
Yeah.
that's the book, Bronnie
Well, you
Ware.
give Bronnie a plug.
Bronnie gets a plug.
Yeah.
The 5 Regrets of the Dying. And she had an amazing conversation with someone who was kind of within the last several weeks of their life. And it was so profound for her that she decided she would try to have a similar conversation for other patients that she nursed. And she had so many very deep, enlightening conversations. She's like, I have to write this into a book. So she writes this book, The 5 Regrets of the Dying. And we think back and we go, like, how many of those regrets were ideal regrets and how many were ought regrets? I ought to have done something. So one ought regret is one of the 5 is I wish I'd stayed in better touch with my friends.
Yeah.
Right? Well, that's I wish I had been I did differently than I did do. Of course, that is repairable, right? Maybe not when you're
Not
in
on your
palliative
deathbed,
care, but but almost all the other regrets were ideal regrets, including I wish I hadn't been afraid to be the person I am rather than the person others expected me to be.
Yeah.
Which is a very profound thing. So I was just blown away by all this. And I thought, okay, there's got to be a financial advisor somewhere in the world who is smart enough to identify in advance the regrets their clients are likely to have, not the regrets like, gee, I should have been a better father. Advisors can't actually change your relationship with your child that was 20 years ago, right? But there are things that you can think, gee, if I don't do this, later in life, I am going to regret that. And the advisor can influence that one. So the advisor has more ability to influence the ought type of regret. Oh, no, not more ability to influence the ideal kind of, I didn't do the ideal, then the ought regret. So I said, who is actually smart enough to have this conversation in advance, right? Well, I looked at your website, James. I couldn't find anything, right? But
it's actually going up next week.
Okay.
Straight after this conversation.
Yeah.
Right. And I found someone, and his name is George Kinder. And he's Harvard educated. He was an accountant, but he moved in doing financial advice. And then he founded something called Financial Life Planning. And George Kinder uses questions, which we talked about a bit earlier. He uses questions in order to understand what clients are likely to regret before they get to the point of regretting it.
Yeah.
And I just looked at this stuff. I'm like, oh, this is just so important. So I ended up creating this presentation that I deliver to advisors whenever they'll let me. And I even will do it for their clients. They want to bring their clients together. We'll go through this presentation. And at the end, we consider these questions together. And I said, do yourself a favor and go ask yourselves these questions and then go back and tell your advisor what you decided, because we don't have to have this kind of like, I didn't do the things I should have done. I was afraid. Well, the advisor can step in the gap between you and your fears, and he can validate the fears that ought to be there. Like, no, you just don't have enough. The advisor can tell you that. Or they can actually step in between you and your fears and say, that fear is not substantive. And you can do this. And then I tell advisors, get a relationship with a travel agent. Just find a really good travel agent. And when a client really wants to do something and they don't give themselves permission to do it, you go and say to Jerry, the travel agent, hey, I know, looking at this, they can afford this trip and they can spend $40,000 on it. They don't think they can, but I know they can. Give me a 3-week itinerary, right? Doing this thing. The man grew up, he wanted to be an astronaut. He saw, in the 1960s, he saw NASA putting men on the moon in the 1969 and then in the early 70s, and he thought he might want to do it. Of course, life didn't work out that way. But there's no reason you can't do a VIP tour of the Kennedy Space Center and of the Johnson Space Center and get this close to moon rocks, right? And you can have a little bit of that experience. Just, you can do that, right? You can give yourself that opportunity, right? Yes, you can't go back and say I was an astronaut, but you can experience something now and have that little bit of childlike joy that you had back then. So So one of the things I decided to make, one of the missions of Consilium and of my work is to get advisors to think about in advance what their clients might regret and do something now so that they don't.
Yeah.
How cool is that?
Very cool. Very cool. And we talk about I talk about money being a bunch of fun tokens a lot to give it meaning behind it and goals-based investing values. It's just a different spin on it, right? Instead of just thinking about, well, what are your values? Almost going, well, where are the areas that you should be spending time that you're not currently? How do you find when you're talking to advisors about having those conversations with clients? It's a very personal piece, right? Is sharing what you are worried you're not doing enough of, or you're deep. That's quite a deep thing, isn't it?
It is. And to be fair, there's some advisors who think, that's just too much of a sacred ground. I don't feel like I'm invited to go into that space with my client. If they invite me into that space, then fine, but I'm not going to initiate. But when I speak to investors, they want their advisors to go in that space. And if the fact is, if they don't, they'll politely tell you.
Back
right?
off, bud.
Yeah.
They'll politely tell you, that's just not. I'm not interested in that. But who doesn't want to be able to sit back and think of themselves as in the last weeks of their life and go, yep, you know what? I gave it a go. I did that. I did that thing. You guys have started this business, right? And good on you, right? I know a lot of people in their 30s who want to have started a business and are scared, right? Now, you'll be able to sit back and go, we gave it a go, right? It may not work. It's probably going to work because you guys are very competent and you do good for your clients. But even if circumstances went that, it didn't work out, you're not going to have to sit back and go, what if we did that?
Yeah.
What if we did give that a try? What could we have accomplished together? What could have that theoretical company that never happened called Lighthouse, what could it have done? You guys started this podcast, right? What if you never did? What if you sit back and said, we had this intention to really share a message with people, whether or not they work with us, that's their own business, but get them really good, high quality information, that can be trusted.
Yeah.
What if you never did that?
Yeah.
Right? Right. And you sat back and went, what could we have done if we actually just gave ourselves permission to aim for something that most advisors who are in their 50s and 60s just they're not even going to think about, right?
Yeah.
So you can see how powerful that is to go, I gave it a go. It may not work, but you tried it, right? So that's powerful not just for you guys, it's powerful for everybody, right? And money is involved, right? When you guys decided to go on your own, you had the financial thought, didn't you? Like, gee, can we afford to do this?
Yeah.
It's partially a money decision.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I thought, Mike's got a couch.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a good backup plan for the wife, the pug, and I.
Yeah.
Mike, it does make me think about how many clients that we talk to who dream big or say, this or that, and you go, you're not going to pull the trigger.
Well, it's always easy to find an excuse, right? It's the excuses and the why nots are so much more apparent and I guess make people so much more fearful than the actual what could I achieve or the goal, right? And
yeah. What would you say, Ben, to those people who have those big dreams, those big aspirations, but whatever's holding them back, they've got commitments to their family where they need their income, or it's not the right timing or conditions or whatever it might be. For those people who have that big, say that big dream, and they go, I want to fundamentally change a very important part of my life, but they aren't pulling the trigger for whatever reason. What would you say to those people?
Well, it's sensitive ground, and there's no one answer that could cover all those different types of circumstances. So the financial advisor's job is to identify real risk and fake risk.
Yeah.
Where is there real risk? And if someone says, this is holding me back, and you go, yeah, that's real, right? Then they can identify tick. That is a real risk.
Yeah.
I have to figure out a way of mitigating that.
Avoid that.
Right? How do I mitigate this, right? And where there is fake risk, this is the kind of risk that exists in our head, right? But it's often fear, right, related. But it's not grounded in at least a financial truth. And you go to tell the client, you say, that one is in your head. That's a made-up one, right? And what you can do then is allow them to help have a strategy to mitigate the real risk and not be encumbered and held back by the fake ones. And then so that they actually know what's in front of them, what is required, at least in our area of competence, which is money, right? Which is the money side of things. You know, I'm not competent. If one of you came to me and said, "Oh, you know, I want to be an opera singer," right? You know, maybe that can't happen, right? You don't have that kind of skill and talent.
Haters.
Right? But what you can do often is you say, well, where's the world's greatest operas?
Yeah.
Have you gone to Vienna and watched an opera? Have you gone to Milan and watched an opera? Would you like to go to Milan and watch an opera? Right? Would that be something that brings you? Oh, I couldn't. Yes, you can. Right? Because you can't make someone an opera singer, but you can expose them to what is a genre that they obviously love and enjoy.
Yeah.
And so there are things you can do around the periphery, you know, like, listen, I would have loved to have been more talented at baseball. I love baseball, you know. And when I moved to New Zealand, suddenly I found myself consuming baseball information in ways I never did before because it was a bit of home.
Yeah.
A bit of home.
Yeah.
You know, and this is not unusual. You hear about New Zealanders going overseas and suddenly they're interested in the All Blacks and the Black Caps like never before, right? Because they're like, I'm holding on to a bit of home.
Yeah.
You know, which is my teams. You know, and so I don't have the talent and never had the talent to be a baseball player. But you know, I could go to spring training one day. Not this year because there's a strike. But but one time, and maybe I can take my boy.
Yeah.
You know, or maybe if I do it soon enough, I can go with my dad. You know, and I can enjoy that, right? And that to me is really powerful. You know, really meaningful. So financial advisors can deal with those things as well, right? So many people in life tell you no. But the saddest thing is when people tell themselves no. And the saddest thing of all is when the no is just a ghost.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep. And, you know, I definitely do have those conversations where I go, that's in your head. That's what you're talking about, you know. Definitely are real risks out there that you want to make sure that you're looking after, but those risks that are in your head, making sure that you're really thinking them through and thinking if they're holding you back.
Yeah,
that's right.
So this is continuing along the lines of discussions where we're talking about money, but not necessarily talking all about money. It's about you. It's about where you want to go, making sure that you're giving your money purpose at the end of the day, and that when it comes to those regrets, those shoulds, those coulds, that you're thinking about, well, what can my financial wealth, what can my position, what can my goals do? How do they change based off the things that are important to me? So Ben, thank you very much for joining us again. We'll do this one more time with Ben next week. Please make sure to give us a subscribe on YouTube. Make sure to give us a review on Apple and Spotify. And if there's a topic you'd be interested in us talking about, please pop it in the comment section because we love it when we get listener questions. See you next week.
Cheers.